Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, appreciate you being here and welcome to the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My kids always tell me this. Like, we have a YouTube
Yes.
channel, and
We're
every
so
YouTube.
bad at that, Will. We never say it. I
I
feel
mean,
so old.
it's like let's just take 2 seconds. The button is somewhere.
Smash the like button.
It's somewhere
If
around
it's
here.
here, if it's here,
So smash it. I'm your political host with your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
doing great. Thanks, Will.
And we have the pleasure of welcoming back Curtis Chang. He's a remarkable thought leader in the intersection of faith and public life and the founder of Redeeming Babel. When we spoke with him last, he was just releasing the Afterparty, which we'll talk a lot more about that. But it's a collection of trainings to to help people, I don't know, not kill each other. I guess that's probably putting it simply. But he developed it along with David French and Russell Moore. And since we spoke with them back in December, they've come out with a book back in April, also called The Afterparty, which was co-authored by Curtis Chang and Nancy French. So welcome back to the show, Curtis.
It's great to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we love having you. Really appreciate just the good work that you're doing out there. So let's play a little catch up. So we talked to you in December 2023. You came out with the book with Nancy French in April. How's the after party going?
It's going really well. I don't know. Should I say something like it's a rager or something like that?
Yes.
Terrible. It's
It's
terrible.
lit. It slaps.
It's
Yeah. Oh, is that the term of art these days? I was gonna say rager, but like talking about rage in politics is probably not the best combination of words that we want to use. No, it's been really encouraging. So what has happened is I think when we last talked, the curriculum, which is a small group curriculum for small groups like Bible studies, prayer groups, women's groups, Sunday schools, to go through help us all move towards a better Christian politics, regardless of where you are on the partisan spectrum. That was released nationally in the beginning of this year, and the uptake has been tremendous. We think our best estimates are probably over 75,000 people have been reached by it.
That's great.
Every church, a church in every state. We've got a church in every state that is going through this curriculum. We're getting some great feedback on it. So it's really becoming, I think, a really helpful tool for pastors and churches to go to when they are feeling like, oh my gosh, it's the election year. How do we form our people? I've got a politically divided church, or I've got a church that leans one way heavily one way or the other. How do I make sure they're still healthy spiritually? Our mantra, our elevator pitch for the after party was, for those of you who are in the church world will know this reference. There's a course called the Alpha course that's for evangelism. That's very popular. That is like the go-to curriculum for churches that want to grow in evangelism. We wanted the after party to be the alpha of politics, to be the go-to resource that, hey, here's a play you can run. And I think it's heading in that direction. The other exciting thing is the book got released. So we realize not everybody wants to go through a small group curriculum. Some people just want to read a book, or they will have a book study. So the book is out there for people to go through, and also it's meant also as a complement to the course. So you may want to read the book first to check out if this is something your small group can do, or you've gone through the course. You're like, I'd like to go deeper on some of the content. The book is there to help you go deeper on some of it. And then the third thing that got released last month, Will and Josh, you may not know this, is the album. This worship album, Songs for the After Party, was released.
Nice.
What?
We collaborated with Porter's Gate, which is a collaborative of Christian musicians, to create a worship album, 6 songs, original songs, that are designed for churches to actually sing as part of the spiritual formation around politics. And the reason we created that was, we realized that this is all about spiritual formation. We're trying to form our people spiritually in this area of politics. And I'm a former pastor, And Josh, you are. Will, I forget. Were you a former pastor also, or are we three pastors here
He
talking?
was kind of
No,
a
well,
youth pastor
I
of
was a youth
sorts.
pastor, but I was basically an atheist up until 2008. So
Okay. Well, I'll ask Josh this, but Will, you can chime in. Like, I was asking myself this question, like, if I'm trying to form my people around a core truth, which we have in the after party, we can talk about what that core truth is. But just take any core truth, and I give you the option. Okay, you can either on this core truth preach the sermon of your life. Okay, the best sermon of your life on that. That option number one. Two, you can write a great book on that subject, and that some of that you can put out there for people to read. Or three, you can even create a course, a video-based course on that truth. Or four, you can embed that truth in a worship song that makes it into your church's worship set in an ongoing, regular way and is good enough and catchy enough that people will hum throughout the week and listen on their own. If I were to give you those options, which will be the most impactful format for your truth to actually get traction in people's lives, which would you choose?
Well, I kind of feel like it's a leading question of sorts.
It is a
but
leading
I would
question.
definitely choose the worship. I'm just kidding.
It's a
Yeah, I
totally
mean,
leading
the
question. And it's a
music is
question I asked.
amazing.
Yeah, it's a question I asked myself, and I realized that we don't have that song. Like, what is the song that we would recommend to a church that actually wanted to form their people spiritually through music? And we know we are formed through the songs we sing. Like,
Absolutely.
let's say a church wanted to do a service leading up to the election on Jesus-centered politics. What does the worship set even sound like? Like, what is it? Onward Christian Soldiers? Is that what we're going to put it? Like, I don't think so, right? So we don't actually have, just like we felt like we didn't have the course or really kind of the particular. There are plenty more books. I think there are more books in their courses, but we certainly didn't have the course for healthy Christian politics. We really didn't have the songs for it. So I'm super excited. The first song was already released by an artist named John Guerra and Sandra McCracken, called The Kingdom of Jesus. You people can look it up on Spotify. John Guerra, Guerra. It's a fantastic song. It's the first of six that are going to be released, and it's all part of our songs for the Afterparty project. And we've got resources for worship leaders, for the sheet music, all of that, prayers that go with it. So we're hoping to help people design, give them the tools to design services to form their people for a healthy, Jesus-centered politics.
I love that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Might I recommend Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue by Toby Keith.
Okay.
And The Chosen One by Natasha Owens. If you haven't heard it, it's quite the song about.
No, you didn't. Yeah, I was going to say music too, as long as I am not having to play it, because I don't necessarily want to have to show up for an extra practice on a Thursday and then do several services. So like I'm all for worship music. I mean, like, and I think today we need a lot more non-controversial worship music after what happened with Hillsong. So I'm all for it. I'm going to go check it out. But you mentioned something earlier about the feedback, and I'm kind of curious. Like you get a lot of, I'm sure, criticisms and compliments. What's probably one of the best compliments you've had about the Afterparty?
Yeah, I think the compliments we've gotten are people who write about how it has affected their relationships, both in terms of like relationships that they're struggling to maintain or how to deal with relationships that they've lost because of politics. Because that's really at the heart of the Afterparty, is giving people a way to navigate their political differences in a way that still holds their relationships together under Jesus. And so when we hear stories about that, that's what's most promising. So for example, in our national launch event on April 19th in Washington, D.C., we had 3 women show up with their fathers. And I'm pretty sure the political differences was what you could imagine. It was like a Trump supporting father and a non-Trump supporting, probably more progressive younger daughter. And they're all three of them were like super they didn't know each other, but these were like, this was just showing you how much of this pattern was emerging. And we had three different people and contacting us like, are you gonna bash Trump during this thing? Because that's gonna be really hard for my dad. And we're like, no, we're not even talking about any political candidate. And by the way, the after party does not even mention any particular political candidate or party, or even, any sort of hot button issue. We're trying to give people some foundational tools. So we assured them no. And then that evening we had a concert in which we were playing songs for the after party. It was the public debut. And my wife and I happened to just sit next to, by accident, one of the daughters who had brought, and she was just like, this was a great event. My dad just raved it, but the dad had left already. But it was like, my dad raved about it. He said, I learned so much. I'm so glad you invited me to this. And she was like, this really kind of brought us together. So those are super encouraging stories. We've had emails from couples who went through this together, just as married couples who told us, boy, this was super helpful for us because we are on opposite sides in our marriage in terms of the partisan divide. And going through the course helped us realize we were making some assumptions about the other that were just untrue. And it was super helpful and healing to surface that. And then we've had stories from people who actually don't have a story about some restored or healed or strengthened relationship, but actually are just processing the grief and the loss of some valued relationships. And the after party is helping them just actually deal with that. And if it's okay, if I could just, I got a kind of a long email from this woman that was so moving and touching to me. Is it okay if I just read it? It's probably like 90 seconds, but is that all right if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is from you'll get the sense of who it's from. She says, for us, it's been our family, friends, and almost our entire group of ranching families that go back generations to when our ancestors first came to Nevada from Texas in 1864 and created these communities of people who intermarried and supported one another. They've been our rock, our identity, our home, and our heart, our family. Deep ties going back over a century, forged stronger by living in a remote location, doing dangerous work far from doctors and hospitals. No indoor plumbing. Winters are brutal. And ranch life out here in these remote places, running cattle that feed America, a person will not survive without relying on one another for help. These bonds are sacred and powerful. There's no physical traditional churches to attend that aren't hours and hours away. But God is closer than ever in these mountainous cathedrals. And we meet him in the hugs and smiles of one of our many communal potlucks after a branding, or after somebody's birthday, or when a neighbor gets stomped by a horse or cattle. Celebrations, and we're running for help for them for miles around. Helping one another, feeding one another, that coming together is our community. And that's what it was until Trump. Being canceled or ghosted or shunned in this type of community is not just an anguishing, despairing, emotional death. It could mean literal death. This is why people jump on the Trump train, even when there's a voice in the back of their head saying he is really a bad, dangerous, unqualified, narcissistic, reckless person. And by the way, I am not trying to read this comment to score a political point. I'm talking about, this is a woman who's her real life experiences in the Trump years. Okay. So readers, please don't, or if you're out there, I'm just trying to depict the human toll of what our politics has cost for us, right? And she says, until Trump, nothing was so serious as to threaten exile from your close-knit ranching community or family. This is different. It is analogous to what is happening in actual physical churches across America. Because I think for them to be shunned or canceled or ghosted by your church community is a threatening kind of spiritual danger, a spiritual death. For me, it's both that. And if I were to go back home, it would be a physical danger or even death. And it reminds me why man from the beginning organized into these communities and why shunning and exile throughout history has been the most severe of punishments. And yet I love them so much. These are the last people I ever thought would cancel me. And I will never get over this. It has emotionally gutted me. It is the most unexpected, disorienting stealing of belonging and identity. It is despairing. It is a sense of betrayal. What a horrible few years. Thank you all for being there and doing this and writing and speaking and everything else you do. Your work is sacred and undertaken in the same communal, helping, uniquely American and Christian spirit that is my proud Nevada ranching background. My people may have lost their way and shunned and ghosted and canceled me. But as Mr. Rogers said, when something upsetting happens, look for the helpers. You will always find people helping. You guys are help in times of trouble for so many Americans today. Were it not for you, all I'd feel like my husband and I would be completely alone. Thank you. This course has been so helpful. So again, I just want to emphasize,
Cool.
you can tell the story from the other partisan side, right? Of people who have been canceled by the left. And the point in reading this particular one is to illustrate the relational carnage that is out there in our communities, in our churches. And that's what our church, our course is trying to address in some way.
Wow, that's a really powerful letter, and you know it. As you're reading that, for some reason, I was thinking of like Beth Moore's experience, and all the things that she went through. That wasn't by Beth Moore by any chance, was it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's again, I want to emphasize this is a bipartisan problem we're having of where we are canceling each other. It's a bipartisan idolatry, right? Where we are canceling each other. I've seen it happen on the left in my own church. I've seen it happen in my, with close friends where it was like, I'm never speaking to that person again once I found out they were voting for Trump. And so we've got to find a way out of this if we are to be the people of God who are united by something more authoritative, more with a higher claim on us than our partisan loyalties.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a good comment. I want you to respond to, and we didn't discuss this, so hopefully it's not going to be a total shock, but I went on Amazon to look at your book and look at the reviews. All in all, pretty good reviews, like tons of 5 stars. No 4 stars, which is really weird, but there was only 3 stars, and all 3 of them left a comment. One is really, really long. I'm not going to read. The other 2 are shorter, but I think kind of gets to the heart of some of the other commentary I've read about what the Afterparty is trying to do. So let me read just the first one's really short. It says, this is not a Bible study about politics, but a progressive study that will pull you away from the Bible and its understanding of politics. The group that funds and wrote these posts of their great achievements, that they push Christians to get the vaccines, really stay clear of this. It is sad and offensive when people push this kind of propaganda and support with Bible. So like what would be sort of the atypical Afterparty response, if this person were saying this right to your face in front of you, but clearly I think this person is a believer. So what tools could we use to engage in dialogue with this individual?
Well, I'd ask them to point out where in the course are they drawing on for us calling people away from politics. We're not doing that. We are calling people to politics, but also actually helping people understand politics cannot be reduced simply to partisan differences. That's what people think of when they think of politics, is partisan differences. And my party should beat your party. That's what politics is. And we're making the case in the book. Politics does involve partisan differences, but it is so much more than that. It is about are we ultimately going to live with one another? How are we going to actually have differences? How do we hold them and still be in a relationship? That's politics. And I would just say, look, read the Sermon on the Mount. I challenge anybody to draw a straight line from anything in the Sermon on the Mount to a straight, uncontested line to some partisan viewpoint on some particular issue. You can try, but it's very difficult to do so. Like, what is the sermon? What is the right Jesus-centered policy on immigration? Like, it's not there. Like, you can sort of try to make the argument, and it's fine to do that. It's legitimate to do that, but it's a fuzzy and line that other people are going to draw differently. But you know what teaching you can draw a straight line from the Sermon on the Mount to politics? When Jesus says, "Do not be angry. Do not commit murder by calling each other raka, fool, moron, idiot," right? Do not lie. Prioritize reconciliation over winning a dispute. So much so that if you've got a dispute, somebody's got a dispute, before you go to court, reconcile with that brother. Like, it's more important for you to be reconciled than to win a dispute. those are all, you can draw a straight line from all of that to political behaviors that are dominating Christian political life today, where we are calling each other raka, fool, moron. We are
It's good.
not prioritizing reconciliation. We are running away from each other. We are choosing to try to win at all costs, right? We are tolerating mistruths, all that. And so what we're saying is those Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount has direct straight line implications for politics and how we behave in politics. Let's call people back to faithfulness in that. And that is a bipartisan call. That, like, on the right and the left, we can actually embrace that. And if we can actually agree to submit our political behavior to the authority of Jesus, as evidenced, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, we can actually hold a lot of differences on the what, right? On the substance of it. And this is the difference we make. There's the how of politics and the what of politics. If we have a Jesus-centered how of politics, we can actually tolerate, we can actually hold differences in the what. The daughter and the father that I mentioned about, or the couple that I talked about, or even this woman, the Nevada ranchers, if they could not cancel each other, if they could have a common how of politics that holds them together, you can actually hold differences on the what much more substantively, much more robustly. And so, yeah, my ultimate answer to critiques like you're leading us away from politics is no, we're leading people through politics, but we're calling people to that politics in Jesus is as much, in many cases, more so about how we relate to one another, how much humility and hope we carry within ourselves. And these are things that Jesus, I think, is very clear about.
That's really, really good. I appreciate that so much. And I love the emphasis on moving from how or what to how. And I'd love to dig down a little bit deeper in that and even kind of give us what are the components of moving from what of politics, like specific ideologies, parties, policies, all of that, to the how of politics. Like, we kind of all know the what of politics in our current idea, like abortion, policy issues, right? Abortion, same-sex marriage, immigration, gun control, big government, welfare, all that stuff, Social Security. We all know the what, like all those things. Those are all policies, and we all know about Democrats and Republicans, and maybe some of us know about libertarians, and maybe a lot less know about the Green Party or whatever it is, and then all the other parties that know. What are the specifics of the how? You kind of alluded to that a little bit, but I'd love for you to bring that out and give us those key concepts that you bring out in the book on the how.
I'd be happy to, Josh. It's a great question. So I talk about some specific behaviors like in the Sermon on the Mount, but the real framework that we use in the Afterparty is that the how of Jesus is defined by two core traits that Jesus calls all of his disciples to, and that is hope and humility. Hope and humility. And what's interesting is if you, and again, you can read the book about all the different scripture we cite about why hope and humility are just permeate Jesus' teaching on the kingdom and how the kingdom comes into the world and how kingdom politics ought to be characterized by hope in him, fundamentally hope in him and in his promise of how the world is going to be made right in the end, and humility, that we are called to put ourselves as the least of these, right? It will become the greatest of these, the way of the cross, to be humble. And so when you talk about then moving towards hope and humility, the way we do this is we actually give people a quiz in the beginning to measure where they are in terms of their hope and humility in terms of their political lives. And then depending on where you score at high in one or low in one or low in both, whatever like that, it produces a four profiles, four archetypes, if you will. So imagine if you put hope and humility on an X and Y axis, right? You get a two by two, right? So if you think of somebody who is high in hope and high in humility, that would be somebody in the upper right quadrant. Somebody high in hope, high in humility, right? That's what we call as a disciple, because a disciple is high in hope and humility by definition. They're humble. because that's the definition of a disciple is I'm a learner. That's what a disciple means. I'm a learner. I don't know everything. I need to learn. So you've got to be high in humility to be a disciple. And you're also high in hope because as a disciple of Jesus, you're saying, I found the rabbi. I found the teacher. I found the one who can lead me to the answers. So that's why I have hope. That's a disciple, right? Now, if you think of somebody who you go to the upper left-hand quadrant, that's on the hope, high in hope, right? But low in humility. That's somebody we call a combatant. A combatant is high in hope. That's why they're fighting. They think they can win. And they think that's why they're in it as a fighter. But they're low in humility because they think they're absolutely right on everything and the other side is absolutely wrong in everything, right? So that's the combatant mindset. High in hope, low in humility. You go to the lower right-hand quadrant, the mirror image of that is somebody who's high in humility, low in hope. That's somebody we call the exhausted, right? So they're high in humility. They're like, I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I've given up. Like this politics thing is hopeless. They've withdrawn, they're checking out, they're exhausted. By the way, what's interesting is that the combatant is actually a minority statistically in the American population. Estimates, if you look at the hidden tribes study, they think that probably in any given community or nationally, or probably in any church, I would say probably like 10% of the population are combatants. But do you know why the combatants so dominate and characterize the spirit of a politics? It's because the exhausted are actually the majority, but they've checked out. They're actually high in humility. They don't want to have a fight to the death. They don't want to have the rage cage match, but they're not like making their voices heard. And so the combatant actually wields outsized influence because the exhausted are in the bushes, in the shrubs. They've pulled back, right? And then you go to the lower left-hand quadrant, somebody who is low in hope and low in humility. We call that person the cynic, okay? Because the cynic is somebody who's low in humility. They think they know better than everybody else. They're like, hands are crossed. They're like, you guys are all got it all wrong. And what do they think they know better than everybody else? That it's all hopeless. That you guys are all, nothing, none of this is, all this is corrupt. All of this is rotten to the core and so forth. I know that profile well because that's what I tested out as. I'm the cynic, But the reason why I think this is helpful is that you can be a Republican exhausted and a Democrat exhausted. You can be a Republican cynic and a Democrat cynic, a Republican combatant and a Democrat combatant. We do have those, right? And what this profile gives then is a way for all of us to actually come across even our partisan differences to realize, wow, we have some commonalities on where we are in the how. We both need to grow in our humility. Our what may be different in our politics, but our how of our humility is we're both low in humility. What do we do with that? And how can we actually help each other in that? And the reason I love this framework and love this quiz is when you center on the what of politics, if you do a course like that, I've been through courses like that. So you ultimately take a quiz on the what, and then it immediately sorts everybody. Oh, you're more progressive. You're more conservative. You're more Republican. And then we're immediately categorized by our oppositions rather than by our commonalities, right? And so what's been so fun in our course is to hear stories of, like it was really interesting talking to a fellow combatant who's on the other side, and then to go through the course and these exercises to discover how does my combativeness show up? I'm low in humility. I guess that means I think I'm really right about that. And maybe I need to question whether my views, how sure am I that my position on immigration is the absolute correct one? And how sure am I, even if I am pro-life, that this particular policy of limiting access is going to actually lower abortion rates? How sure am I of that? This is where we want to get everybody into hey, once we are all of us growing both in our humility and our hope, we can find some common ground. And by the way, I think it can be obvious, if you grow in your humility, you can hear the other side. I think also if we grow in our hope, we're also more able to hear the other side. And I think this is important to recognize, is because so much of our politics emotionally is driven by fear and anxiety, which is a form of losing hope in Jesus, right? And so we feel like this election is like an absolute apocalyptic event, because if we lose, it's hopeless. Like it's going to be a disaster of epic biblical proportions. Once we inject that kind of hopelessness into our politics, it becomes really hard to actually relate to somebody who is voting on the other side of that, right? And so this is why growing in our hope actually enables us to be in relationship with other people, because we realize, hey, just because you are going to be voting for the other candidate, this does not mean you are casting a vote for utter despair and disaster, and I am standing on the side of the only thing that is going to hold reality together.
That's really amazing. I'm so glad that you kind of unpacked that. I mean, I'm like, if I didn't already, at least experience the material that you guys put together, I would definitely be listening to this and Googling or duck going if you're afraid of Google, like what this program is all about, because it sounds really, really awesome. And like as you're talking, I'm like, which one am I? Like I might be a cynic also, kind of based on what you're saying. But I I think that the after party and everything you all are trying to achieve is such a noble effort. Like I don't think you all are necessarily going to be able to retire early because of this. Um, so which really tells me something like, hey, like you want to sort of expand kind of your Christian witness and just sort of do the part that you feel called to do to kind of heal a divided country. And the I've read a bunch of stuff attacking you, David, Russell, and others. Just because I always like to kind of go into these interviews with some balance, just to kind of know like what you're having to contend with, and the calls and emails and whatever that you're getting. And one of the big overarching themes that a lot of your critics are talking about is, you all being never Trumpers or whatever. And I don't think it's necessarily a secret. Like all of you have all been fairly vocal about your thoughts about never about who Trump is as a person.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, is being a never Trumper like incompatible with the after party's, goal of healing political divisions like within the church, especially if those divisions revolve around Trump?
Yeah, I don't think so. We wouldn't be doing this if it were the case. Because again, in this distinction between the what and the how, we're not saying you should have no opinion or thoughts about the what of politics. And this is another common sort of misunderstanding of the after party is you're saying Christians shouldn't care about politics. And there again, when they say that, they mean the what of politics. We're not saying that. We're simply saying there's also the other how side, and the what differences are much easily held if we have a common how, and especially it is not justifiable morally, biblically, to sacrifice the how, to say we're gonna just throw out the Jesus call to truth telling, to not mocking, and all that in order to just score a point on the what. That's what we're saying. But we're not saying like you shouldn't, of course not. Like David French is writing columns every week on the what of politics. Russell Moore is, writing his own columns on the what of politics. I will make my own statements on certain what of politics. But that's not what the after party is doing. The after party, like we don't even, I think we mentioned Trump once, only in the phrase, I think it was Russell that said this, in the Trump era. We don't even mention him by name. We're just using him to say an era. Right, because we're not trying to like people can have viewpoints on something in one context. Like if you were to ask me now, what do I think about Trump? I'll tell you, but that's not what the after party. The after party, we're not smuggling in our what politics in that. And I challenge people to, if you really think we're doing that, go in through the course, check it out for yourself, or read the book. Point to me the passages where we're doing that. Like please, like rather than just make a blanket accusation like that, cite the passages, cite the video where I'm doing that. I want to hear that. Nobody has done that. And then the only other thing people have said is you're taking funding from secular funders, some of them who are progressive. Yes, we're also taking funding who are conservative funders, who are secular, and we're also taking funding from Christians. We're taking funding from people who have a common commitment to a healthier politics among Christians. And if you're left, right, if you're secular Christian, if you share that goal, that common goal, that's a great example of how our politics are meant to be, where we can find common ground. Let's work together, and we'll disagree on other things. I'm sure I disagree with you guys on a number of political things, right? I'm sure if we broke things down, there are a number of whats that the three of us disagree on. Should that prevent us from associating together? Should that prevent us from working on something together like this podcast, just because we have differences on other things? I don't think so. I think like how we are meant to have healthy politics is where there is common ground, let's work together. And we can, in this context, for this project, we can set aside our differences on other things. That's how we feel about our funders. Like, we agree on some common things we're doing. We probably disagree with all of our funders on other things. That's just normal human reality. And one thing that's to be absolutely clear, none of our funders have ever even tried to influence the content of the after party. None of them even tried. And if they tried, we would turn down their money right away.
That's really amazing. I will say I do take particular issue against folks that think DC is better than Marvel. I will fight somebody.
That's a you're right on that one, and you're ready to throw down.
That's good, man.
I'm with you, Will, on that. I gotta say, Team Marvel.
Dude, that's awesome. I want to take the view here of someone who maybe they're a cynic. I'm not sure which one of those categories, the combatant, the exhausted, the cynic. And then there's one more that you mentioned, and somehow
that's the disciple. That's the one we're all aspiring to be.
Oh, yeah. Well, we all want to be the disciple. Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Well, hopefully. But I want to take this idea like, okay, so maybe someone's looking at our country and our current politics, and for whatever reason they don't think that talking about it is going to solve anything. There is a study, actually, and I don't think this is a minority, right? There is a study from the I always forget the name, Will, of the organization, the PRI, Public Research and Religion Institute.
Yep.
And basically where the majority of people didn't think it was appropriate for someone to try to convince them of another side. And I know that's not what you guys are saying, but almost this idea like, hey, we could listen to each other, but let's just let sleeping dogs lie, or let's not create conflict or whatever it is. And one of the concepts that you bring out in your book that I'd love for you to kind of talk about, because I think it creates the need and kind of gives the tension that we all need to feel, is this idea of the big sort that has occurred, and even like the idea of the disappeared ones. Yeah. And I think that if you could help, what are those concepts? How do they create the context for us to understand like why this is so important that we're getting to the how and learning how to connect, as opposed to focusing in our silos on the what?
It's a great question, Josh. So the big sort refers to a massive demographic phenomenon that's been happening for decades now, but has accelerated in the last 20 years, where people are sorting themselves out in their social circles by partisan lines. It's happening even geographically. Like it's people are moving and relocating to be like people that they are similar to. And it's primarily bipartisan. And I would say there's an overlap on racial lines as well. And the reason why that is dangerous is it means that people who think differently than you are disappearing from your very everyday life, from even your cognitive horizon, right? So this is why in 2016, you had so many Democrats who were shocked that Trump won, because they're like, nobody voted for him. Well, that's because their circle of everybody was all Democrats, right? So it was shocking. Same thing happened in 2020 in the other direction, right? And so this just shows you how ideologically, how partisan divisions have come to define our social circles, such that those who would be different, which is like roughly half the country, have disappeared from our view and our actual relationships. And so that's very dangerous because the studies show that when you get together in a group that is like-minded, you actually become more extreme. You actually become, because you end up, there's a sort of, it's the echo chamber, the bubble, the self-reinforcing biases that just pile on to one another. You become to think it's crazy anybody would think differently than us because everybody thinks this way. And again, you think everybody thinks this way. Everybody normal thinks this way because everybody normal is exactly like you, at least in your partisan viewpoints on politics. And so this is why it leads to polarization. It's called the law of in-group polarization. When you're gathered in groups, you actually get more polarized. And it causes the partisan mind, like the mind that actually is closed off to any opposing viewpoint, that views any opposing viewpoint as a threat, as ultimately false and a threat, and it's something to be destroyed, damaged, or eradicated, or just ignored, maybe even. And it devastates our humility, right? Because we just think we're right, and we're shut off from somebody who can at least cause some doubt, cause some question, cause some thought. Maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I haven't gotten it all right. So it makes us much less humble. So in that hope humility piece, it really does a number on our humility levels.
Last night, we had our Bible study, of which Josh leads. I attend because I go to Josh's church, and he provides like the good flavor Kool-Aid, that you want to drink. And one of the things that we spoke about or talked about was like hearing from God, and like we were kind of all over the map using a range of different metaphors that I won't necessarily like torture everybody here with today, but like, people hear from God a number of different ways, and a number of people hear from God and think and say stuff that contradicts what I feel God is telling me. And speaking about kind of the how of discussing stuff, like you mentioned earlier that if we were to do a survey, there'll probably be a number of stuff we all agree on, probably a number of stuff we disagree on, and then probably some stuff that would be sort of like movable opinions about things, like you could probably convince me to like DC more than Marvel, but you'll have to put
I would
in the
never try, Will. I would never try.
That's right.
What about Chick-fil-A, Will?
or force me to like Chick-fil-A, because I just don't. This isn't like a political statement. I just don't like their food. I mean, and it's expensive.
In-N-Out, Will? What about In-N-Out?
Yeah, In-N-Out is my jam. I mean, being born and raised in Cali, it's like that's in my blood, So
excellent.
Animal style. Got to get the burger animal style.
That's right.
Anyways, so how do you like, interact, have those kinds of conversations when someone is starting from the position that God told them XYZ?
No, I think this is a problem that increasingly characterizes sort of certain streams of Christianity that especially, I think, elevate the personal authority over biblical authority, essentially, kind of in terms of, and Russell Moore tells a story when he talks about, he's been preaching a sermon on turn the other cheek, and somebody will confront him afterwards. Where did you get those liberal talking points? And Russell will be like, liberal talking points. This is from Jesus. And
that's amazing.
Rather than being corrected and being humble, like, oh, maybe I should know my scripture better, the person will be like, I don't like that. And they will sort of assert a personal, like, I don't believe that works anymore. Right. So they're literally asserting their personal authority to override the words of Jesus in that case. And so it's very, I think people who, look, I totally believe that we hear directly from God, right? In a whatever, and people do it differently, through intuition, through sense, through whatever. I mean, all the different ways that people through a scripture that jumps out and so forth like that, that maybe even was taken out of context, but it was what God used, the Spirit of God used. But we should be absolutely standing firm that we do not have the personal authority to override the words of Jesus. And Jesus has plenty to say about our political behavior. He really does. And this is what our course in our book is trying to articulate, is Jesus's teaching can only be understood that he was teaching in his own context a very politically polarized society. So that wasn't all, of course, not, you can't boil Jesus' teaching down to that, but you also can't make sense of a lot of what Jesus is saying if you don't understand that he was trying to create a new way of being, a new party, a new group of disciples in a politically polarized situation. And that if we assert our own sort of preferences, we're in real danger of, of idolatry, of holding up some authority, whether it's some partisan figure over Jesus. So we've got to really, reject that.
Yeah, I don't know if you read the N.T. Wright book, The Jesus and the Powers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh. I mean, number one, it's pretty dense. So like kind of a feeble theology mind like mine has to read it a couple times. but like once you get through it, he really, really sort of lays out kind of this political climate
That's right.
that existed during that time. Highly recommend it for anybody who's never read it before.
One thing that Wright helped me see, and it's in the book, was just to understand the typical labels that we see and understand their political ramifications, the labels that are attached to figures. Like, for instance, understanding what a zealot was and what a tax collector was, and realizing those aren't just job descriptions, or those aren't like, sort of bumper sticker things. Those are like life or death identities, and they were pitted like in violent terms, like in ways that would make our red and blue seem actually kind of tame by comparison, because the central political issue that Jesus was dealing with in his day was, what does Israel do about Rome, about the Roman oppression that was, had taken over the country? And the tax collector said, what we do is we collaborate with the Romans. In fact, we collect their taxes for them. That's what a tax collector decided to do. A zealot was, we try to kill them, or we try to at least violently eject the Roman oppressors. So two about as opposite of a views as you can have about what you do with Rome politically, right? Now you look at how Jesus created his first 12 disciples. You go to Matthew 10:11 about when he describes the calling of his first disciples. The first 12 disciples are listed. Most of them are listed by their common way that people are identified in first century Israel, which is son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, right? There are two people in his first 12 disciples that are identified differently: Matthew and Simon. Matthew is identified explicitly as who he called himself were Matthew, the tax collector, and Simon, the zealot. That's not an accident. That's not a throwaway line. What the scriptures are telling us is Jesus very deliberately said, in my core party, my core party of the 12, I am deliberately choosing one person from the most opposite ends, or two people, one from each of the opposite ends. And that's not an accident. Jesus is saying something about his kingdom, that his kingdom transcends, overrides even the steepest, most hostile partisan differences of society.
Yeah, that's so good. And that is like such a great insight that is so understandable once it's so relatable once you understand the context. Yeah. And you understand just how political and divisive the world that Jesus entered into really was. And violence was a very real option. Like, it wasn't like a weird option to a lot of people. It was a very real option. And like, we treat political violence, and I would hope, and I know that's increasingly less the case, which is disturbing, but in America, right, we've tried to treat political violence as basically taboo and anathema.
Yeah.
Right? Which we should see it as.
Yeah.
But that was not the world of the Bible, and certainly not the world that Jesus entered into. And it's such a profound insight. And I would love it if you would kind of like following up on that and then connecting it to the after party I would love for you to kind of describe again the big vision for a better Christian politics that the After Party is trying to achieve. Even getting down to maybe some of the practical like engagements, like if we're thinking about like if you getting through your book, what now is someone, what should they be doing? What kind of steps should they be taking?
Yeah.
And how can they use this
Yeah.
like to further that big vision of what you guys have for the After Party?
Well, in terms, I'll talk first about the specific practical steps people could take, and then I'll talk about the big vision. So in terms of specific practical steps, it really, a lot of it depends on where you test out as combatant, cynic, or exhausted, or maybe as disciple, because I think that tells you, do I need to grow in hope? Do I need to grow in humility? Do I need to grow in both? And our book provides very concrete ways that you can do that with other people, including people who think differently than you. And so I encourage people to take the course, read the book. There's some very practical steps that you can do that hopefully involve preserving or recovering relationships that are either in the danger of being lost, getting disappeared, or already have been lost. And we provide some just, sort of, again, practical things people can do, and also hopefully inspiring examples and stories about how this works out in real life. I do want to say something about your question, Josh, which I think is a great question, which is like, what's the big vision? And the big vision is captured by the title of the course, the book, and the song and the worship album, which is The After Party. We chose that title to capture the big vision. So one part of that vision is to say it's the after party. It's what comes beyond partisan loyalties. There is something that is beyond that. There is something that comes after that and transcends that. And we're calling people to that. So let's not get so fixated on our current lowercase Republican Democrat party differences. Let's look to the Jesus after party, which is a source of great hope. And the reason why it's a great hope is the other meaning of the after party is the event that we all should have that calls for our greatest humility and hope in. And that is a future event called the return of the King. The return of the King, when Jesus returns to this world to make all things right, to heal all things that are broken. And the way the scriptures describe when that happens, when the King of Kings returns to make all things right, all things in the world, in this world, in our society, right? I'll make all things right. When heaven comes to earth, quoting N.T. Wright's big emphasis here, right? Scripture most frequently describes that event as feeling like a party. Right? This is the wedding feast of the Lamb, or in Isaiah 66, the feast on Mount Zion, when the King returns to Zion, right? It's described as a party. It's like, oh my gosh, things are finally made right. It's going to feel, that's the Jesus after party. And you know what? That is the only event that's happening in the future that's going to decisively make all things right. It's not some election. It's not some policy win. It's not some Supreme Court appointee that's going to make all things right. Those things are all mere pointers in one direction or another, depending on where you view. They're either pointing forward or backwards or whatever, but they're at best signposts to that ultimate event that all Christians are saying that's what we place our ultimate hope in. And that's going to be humble. And the scripture is clear. When that happens, we're all going to be humbled. Because we're all going to be shown we've gotten some part of that, some part of our morals, ethics, relationships, and politics wrong. It's going to be a judgment process. We're all going to be shown like, oh man, I blew that. I was wrong on that. Right? So we're all going to be humbled by that day, but we also ultimately have hope in that day because that's the event in which all things are made new. And that then relativizes all of our partisan differences because we know we're all going to be wrong in some way. We know we are currently wrong in some day. That judgment day, that return of the King, tells us we should be humble. We're all wrong in some way, in ways that we don't even know. Right? So let's have a little humility in our political viewpoints. And let's not get so anxious, fearful, threatened by what happens in our everyday partisan politics, because we should not be investing our ultimate hopes in some outcome there to protect us from something or to achieve something. It's not going to happen. If any of us thinks the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is going to save us from all things that are evil and broken in the world, my gosh, please open your eyes. That is not going to happen. And so there's only one king that can actually deliver on that campaign promise, and that is the King of Kings.
That's pretty amazing. And, I should just add that the Supreme Court is doing their part in helping usher in a king with their immunity opinion that they just issued. Oh my gosh, I am the cynic. It just dawned on me.
You don't need to take the survey. Well, I think we've already decided.
Yeah, I don't. Okay, so plug time. So like, how can people get access to you, your work, the after party, the book, all the things?
The best way is just to go to after-party.org, after-party.org, and you'll see links there to the course, which is free, completely free, thanks to our funders. Those secular, progressive,
those heathens,
and conservative, and Christian and non-Christian. Thanks to our funders, it's free for anybody who wants to take that course. The book, you got to pay for. The Zondervan insists, my publisher insists, but you can guide the book, and it also you can get the song on Spotify or whatever, Apple Music or whatever. The first song's released. There's more coming every month. The first one's great. I really recommend people to go check out that song, The Kingdom of Jesus. So go to after-party.org and start somewhere and see where your interests take you.
Can you find the worship songs on like CCLI or anything like that?
I think they are. Yes, it's published by Integrity Music, so I know Integrity is part of the CCLI sort of ecosystem. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but yes, it's available for worship leaders, and I think our website has instructions on how to get that, really good, yeah. How to get the sheet music and stuff like that. Yeah.
Big shout out to the people that have to do the slideshow for the words or whatever. So just wanted to make sure they're fully represented in this conversation. Well, thanks so much, Curtis, for coming back on the show. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yes.
And Josh, I love what you guys are doing. I love how you're incarnating and embodying the ability to be friends and followers of Jesus across the different whats of politics. So thanks for your ministry, and I'm really glad to be part of it. And invite me back anytime. Always say yes.
Awesome, will do. Well, to our listeners and viewers, hey, thanks again for joining us. And remember, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.